A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is HBO's latest Game of Thrones spin off series. Based on the Tales of Dunk and Egg series by George R.R. Martin, the series has received a hugely positive response from critics and audiences, with its viewership rising week on week, and audience scores hitting near 10 out of 10 for multiple episodes, making it arguably the most hyped show of the year. So in today's video, I'm going to be discussing how A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms has been able to captivate audiences and deciding whether it's deserving of such adulation. And just for a heads up, this discussion will contain major spoilers. So, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is set around 90 years before the events of Game of Thrones, and centres around Sir Duncan the Tall, played by Peter Claffey, who's a low-born hedge knight looking for purpose in his life after the death of his mentor, Sir Alan of Pennytree. They'd been on the way to a tournament in Ashford when Sir Alan died, so Dunk decides to take his place in hope of securing glory and wealth, whilst elevating Sir Alan's legacy. On the way there, he comes across a young boy called Egg, played by Dexter Solancel, who becomes his squire. Now, as a big fan of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, I was looking forward to this and hoping it would be a worthy entry into the Game of Thrones franchise. However, I did have some reservations going into this, as Game of Thrones did have a noticeable drop in quality towards the end. And whilst I like the second season of House of the Dragon more than most, I can appreciate that it wasn't the resounding success that everyone wanted. But thankfully, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is a refreshing new entry into such an iconic franchise. Compared to what we've previously seen, this series has a noticeably lighter tone, with more emphasis on humour and the camaraderie between Dunk and his acquaintances, most importantly, Egg. And let's start with those two, as the characterisations of Dunk and Egg, in combination with the actors' performances, are a major strength of the show. They're the heart of the series, and what makes us keep coming back to follow the journey. I don't think anyone would describe Dunk as being an intellectual, but he has a good heart and wants to do the right thing, even at his own expense. He's not the loudest of characters, in fact, he's fairly quiet, considering he is the lead character. But what he does say has weight to it, and it always comes from the right place. He's not a perfect person, he's had a tough life, as was shown in flashbacks, but he's just so likeable, due to the writing, but also due to Peter Claffey's performance. He comes across so earnest and genuine that you can't help but root for him. He's in a difficult environment, where people talk down to him and belittle him due to his upbringing, but he never stoops to their level. He always acts with honour, which is commendable, considering he's in a savage world, where people just look out for themselves. And then we get to Egg, who arguably steals the entire show. From his very first scene, you can tell that there's something special about this kid. He seems wise beyond his years, and again, he's just so likeable. He's so cheeky and sarcastic, the polar opposite to Dunk, which can make for some comical interactions between them. Like, the kid's hilarious. Dexter Solancel as Egg was brilliant all season, with impeccable comic delivery, whilst also able to convey the weight of the more emotional moments. I was super impressed with him. Dunk and Egg's dynamic was crucial for the show to work, and they've got great chemistry. These two are like chalk and cheese, but somehow they complement each other wonderfully. Unlike previous entries into the franchise, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is very short, with the runtime of each episode typically between half an hour and 45 minutes. They even avoid using the typical Game of Thrones intro that we've come to expect. There's no waiting around, they just throw us straight into the story, which I did appreciate. It's all killer, no filler. And whilst the episodes may be shorter, the production value still remains top quality. Everything from the set design and costumes to visual effects, with it looking just as impressive as both Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is smaller and more intimate than Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon. It doesn't have the same grand scale where it's about the state of the kingdom or saving the world, but crucially, it still feels important, which is largely due to the characters. You care about the characters' journey because you care about them. It matters to them, therefore it matters to you. That's so important to develop in storytelling, as it means that even if there's a slower section, you're still locked in, as you're engaged with the characters. I've watched TV shows in the past with fantastically innovative stories, but when it comes to the characters, they're dull and uninspiring. But A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms works in both respects, with it giving us memorable characters, with a strong, albeit smaller scale story. As the season progresses, Dunk prepares for the tournament, carrying out the necessary steps needed to enter. However, before he can enter the tournament, he's imprisoned. Throughout the season, we've seen Dunk watching Tanzel perform a puppet show, with Dunk clearly taking a liking to her, but during one performance, she depicts a dragon being killed, which Aeron Targaryen takes offence to, and he breaks a finger. Before things can escalate further, Dunk steps in and attacks the prince, before being apprehended by guards and thrown in a cell. At this point, it's revealed that Egg's real name is Aegon Targaryen, brother of Aeron, and suddenly, his attitude makes a whole lot of sense, as he does feel like a Targaryen, just one of the nicer ones. He decided to run away after his brother Daeron refused to take part in the tournament, as he'd always dreamed of being a squire. With Dunk already in major trouble for attacking the prince, things are made even worse when Daeron lies and accuses him of kidnapping Egg. In Westeros, these instances would often be settled by a trial by combat, but Aeron demands a trial by 7, meaning Dunk needs to find 6 knights to fight with him. Notable members of Dunk's group include Sir Lionel Baratheon, a super charismatic knight who is one of my favourite supporting characters, as well as Prince Baelor Targaryen, who steps forward to help him, to the shock of many. As anyone who's watched Game of Thrones will attest, this franchise does battle sequences exceptionally well. Battle of the Bastards, Hardhome, and Blackwater have some of the greatest battle sequences ever put to screen, so there was a high level of expectation for the Trial by 7, and I'm delighted to say that they knocked it out of the park. Obviously, it doesn't have the grand scale of a Battle of the Bastards, but it still remains as brutal, gruesome, and exhilarating as we'd expect. And once again, I've got to put a lot of it down to the strong character work done in the previous episodes. The stakes feel sky high because you care about the characters. I'd have been gutted to see Dunk, Baelor, Lionel, or Raymond die. So it makes you extra invested in what you're seeing, and with Aeron having multiple members of the Kingsguard on his side, it means that Dunk and his team are at a real disadvantage, which increases the feeling of anxiety and tension exponentially. At one point, it looks like Dunk is finished. He can't take anymore, and seeing Egg scream in anguish was absolutely heartbreaking. I really felt his pain. Thankfully though, Dunk is just about able to recover and forces Aeron to yield in a moment that gave me a massive sense of relief, even though realistically, I knew that he was never likely to die. They've got more seasons coming, but as is typical in George R.R. Martin's brutal and unforgiving world, it couldn't possibly end on a happy note, with it revealed that Prince Baelor had been dealt a lethal blow to the back of the head, which devastated Dunk as well as the viewers. For a Targaryen, he was a good man, and one of my favourites, so naturally, that meant he couldn't survive. In the finale, we see the ramifications of the death of Prince Baelor, with the episode embracing a more sombre tone. Dunk is overcome with grief, with survivor's guilt consuming him. It was horrible to see him like this, but understandable, as Prince Baelor was the heir to the throne, and hand to the king, so his death was a huge deal in Westeros. This feeling of inadequacy is likely due to Dunk never being knighted by Sir Arlan, which we discover in a flashback. Sir Arlan was his hero. His opinion of him meant everything to Dunk, so if Sir Arlan didn't think Dunk was worthy of being a knight, then that will naturally hurt his self-esteem. Dunk is broken, and doesn't feel capable of taking on Egg as his squire anymore. He doesn't feel worthy. This devastates Egg, who overhears Dunk speaking to his father. Consumed by anger and sadness, Egg attempts to kill his brother whilst he sleeps, blaming him for what's happened, but his father stops him. Targaryens do have murderous tendencies. It was said that madness and greatness were two sides of the same coin. Every time a new Targaryen is born, the gods toss the coin in the air, and the world holds its breath to see how it will land, which Daeron recognises, so he convinces Dunk to take Egg as his squire, hoping that that will prevent him from becoming like Aeron. But when Dunk returns to Egg's dad and offers to take him on the road, he rejects him, not wanting Egg to live like a peasant. So Dunk heads off on his next adventure, but before he can leave Ashford, he's stopped by Egg, who tells him that his dad has changed his mind. I'm not sure about you, but I didn't believe for a second that Maker had changed his mind. Egg is so headstrong, so I suspected that he'd run off again, which is confirmed during the final scene of the season. He's such a little shit, and I love him. So Dunk and Egg leave together, with so many adventures to come. With beautiful orchestral music playing in the background, we see a representation of Sir Arlan riding his horse with them before veering off to the left, symbolising Dunk finally moving on, which I found to be incredibly emotional, charming, and poignant. It's a beautiful and bittersweet ending to a delightful season of television. Whilst I don't think that it reaches the epic highs of peak Game of Thrones, I don't think that's an issue, as they're two very different shows. with a different sense of scale. Most crucially, it still feels consistent with the world of Westeros, even if it is more grounded, and ultimately, it is very good. So I can fully understand why the response to the show has been so positive. This is only the start of Dunk and Egg's journey, and I can't wait to see more of their adventures together. So unsurprisingly, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms gets 2 thumbs up from me, as it's definitely worth watching. So, what did you think of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms? And what's your favourite spin-off series? House of the Dragons or this? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe for more. And I'll see you next time for another video. Goodbye.